Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
One of the most rewarding parts about running a podcast is the exposure that Bryan and I get to some of the most unique people walking this planet. And you're about to meet two of those people, Jade Bryce and Mercedes Terrell, a dynamic duo who've carved out a niche that I've yet to see anywhere else, the intersection of teaching men inner work and OnlyFans. Bear with me for a minute here. You see, Jade and Mercedes met as Bellator MMA ring girls. Jade's a former Playboy playmate. Mercedes is still an MMA ring girl and a fitness model. And they both have OnlyFans accounts where they post sexy photos and videos of themselves, and they get paid for it. And yes, Jade and Mercedes have very deliberately placed their sexuality on the forefront and are leveraging that influence as a bridge to teach men how to go deeper within. Specifically, how to develop the king energy and leadership ability inside of themselves. Now, this episode is bound to be triggering and controversial to some of you who might be skeptical of that approach. I certainly know that my eyebrow was raised the very first time I came across their social media accounts. But when they invited me on their podcast, which is called The Magic Hour, which is a top 50 Apple podcast in the philosophy category, I quickly found myself in the presence of two intelligent, very well-researched, and deep women who carry the type of wisdom that you can only acquire growing up in the school of hard knocks. While Mercedes and Jade have millions of followers today, they weren't always hot shit. Both of them grew up being treated as ugly ducklings and social outcasts in their childhoods, leading to some deep emotional trauma. Mercedes grew up in a sexually oppressive environment. Jade was sexually abused and battled suicidal tendencies for many years. And the two of them have spent much of their adult lives doing deep inner work, going to therapy, doing plant medicines, and reclaiming their own sexuality as a method of healing and empowering themselves. Today, they have over 11 million followers on their combined social media accounts and are using those platforms to guide men who came for the visual stimulation to take a deeper inner journey to discovering the king within themselves. So in this episode, you're going to learn about this unique way that Jade and Mercedes are Trojan horsing sexuality as a bridge to get men to do deeper inner work. We're going to talk about why women are always testing their romantic partners and how to stand strong in those tests. Jade and Mercedes talk about the 4 biggest turn-ons that they found by surveying their huge audience of women followers. We're going to talk about how to cultivate the penetrative presence of a king. Right? You always hear about presence, but this term of penetrative presence of a king that opens a woman in ways that she's never experienced before. Near the end of the episode, we're going to be talking about, and Mercedes walks us through a presence practice that helps you to stay calm and collected during triggering conflicts. And could there ever be an episode of this podcast where we don't talk about masturbation? And we have I think a 6 or 7 minute segment on how to masturbate like a king. And we've also got 20 minutes at the very end of the episode, 20 bonus minutes of content where Jade and Mercedes go into the highlights of their origin stories. That'll give you a little bit of a teaser of some of the shit that they've been through. And if that piques your interest, I've also linked the full-length episodes from their Magic Hour podcast where they go into the deep dive. I think it's like a couple of hours into each of their origin stories of their past, which I've listened to. They've gone through some really powerful stuff in the past, which I think will give you a deeper sense of appreciation of where they are coming from in placing their sexuality up front and the deep work that they've done to be able to teach men how to awaken the king within them. So please enjoy this episode on Awakening the King Within, featuring Jade Bryce and Mercedes Terrell. So Bryan, we are joined by two trailblazing renegades doing something that we have not yet seen in the personal development space, especially working for men. And I have had the distinct pleasure of being a guest on the Magic Hour podcast that these two women host, but you have not. So I would love to read the bio that they provided to me in advance to get your first reaction. And then we will bring the lovely Jade and the Mercedes on the show as we're going to be talking about awakening the kings in our audience. So here's their bio. Many know these women from the world of MMA, where they spent over 12 years as ring girls for Bellator MMA and Invicta Fighting Championships. But they're currently changing the world through their podcast, The Magic Hour, which is a top 50 philosophical podcast on iTunes, where they dive deep with psychologists, MMA fighters, spiritual shamans, sex experts, and other masters of unexpected realms to uncover exactly how we go about stepping into our highest selves. They've also created a men's workshop called Awakening the King Within, where they use their expertise as women to pioneer men towards their individual purpose and teach them how to turn their world and the women in it fully on. Setting an extraordinary example of how to turn what some might call a one-dimensional career path into a multifaceted calling, they're navigating the risky waters of the highly controversial social media platform OnlyFans, where they boldly display their unique mixture of sexy seductress, tempting men from across the globe, and brazen philosopher guiding men towards embodying their inner kings. Bri, thoughts, feelings, reactions?
I love the intersection here. Undoubtedly, you and I both, let's say, found the inner work through questioning our sexual behaviors and sexual past. And it's such, for guys, it is such a place of feeling like we have to have it all figured out. And what I love about what Mercedes and Jade are doing is that they're bringing that together and saying, hey, it's okay to start here. And why not? So I'm pumped to learn more about this and the different platforms that you guys are bringing to making it palatable for guys to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. There's no doubt going to be one of our most provocative conversations. So welcome to the Great Man Within podcast, Jade and Mercedes. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. It is exciting stuff. It's so exciting to hear you guys reading that bio, even just playing with this information. You know, this is really the beginnings, I think, for us for what our next chapter is here. And we're really, I don't know, it's so cool to hear it too from two men who we respect in this space so much, and to be here on this show with you guys, to be able to play and dance with this new venture that we're trailblazing.
Right on the money.
I love this idea of awakening the king within, because there's not a guy that I know that's even attempted to start down this path that doesn't believe that there is a king inside. I know that I sometimes wonder where that's at internally. I'm like, why am I showing up in certain ways of my life where I'm doing a little bit less, or I'm not really stating what I want? And so the idea that there's a path here to awaken that king within, this is exciting stuff.
The first place that we have to begin is helping us to understand that this intersection that you two have found, I've not seen anyone else doing this, which is OnlyFans meets personal development, right? And how does that whole thing work? So whoever wants to jump in first on that one.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what you guys talked about at the top of the show here about dissolving that shame around sexuality, especially for men. You know, men, as you guys talk about so much on your show, we have been raised in a culture where men are basically told that being a man looks a certain way, and that it is going to also include objectifying women a lot of the time. It's hard to just blame men for being like these guys who feel like, you know, going on porn, they see it on porn, they see it all around them where they should be objectifying, and that's what makes them macho or makes them the man. And then to suddenly at some point in life where women decide, you know what, I don't want to be objectified anymore, or I'm done getting validated through sexuality and solely through sexuality, men transfer over, and men are like, wait, I've gone my whole life doing it this other way and being told that's the way I'm supposed to do it. So for us, a lot of it was about like, how do we talk to these men without shaming them and meeting them where they're at? And that was largely at this entry point of putting sexuality on the forefront, putting our sexuality on the forefront, and of course, making sure that we felt subjectively sexy in the work that we were putting out there and the content we're putting out there. but allowing it to be like, hey, dude, if you come at my work and decide to objectify me first, no problem. And sometimes that's all they're going to ever do is decide like, this is a sexy girl, let me masturbate to her or something like that. Hey, fine. We'll have a monetary exchange. I can make money off of this. This is mutually beneficial in that way. I know myself. I don't feel like I was used as an object. I know I put that content out there and I was subjectively sexy. I felt sexy in my body while doing it. But then there are men who come through that channel and think that that's all it's going to be. And then they stay a little longer or they connect with us in the DM and they realize that there's something else here that they can play with. And the dance kind of begins from there. And usually it is in our DMs. And now because we have this workshop, they can dance there and see, like, maybe I can stay in this space and talk about stuff. Maybe it's my feelings. Maybe it's things that were taboo to talk about as a younger person or, as a man in this culture. And then we get into that deeper work with them and we invite them to go deeper. We provide them with all kinds of resources and modalities to go deeper from there.
It's basically the boldest Trojan horse that I've ever seen attempted, right? I mean, it's like, and so what are you finding? I would imagine that the majority of men who come through maybe just want to stop at that. Hey, like, I like looking at you. I'm going to do what I'm going to do in my own private time with that. And then there's like a subset that comes through and says, I'm actually interested in engaging more. Or am I wrong about that? Is it like, are the ratios flipped?
It's crazy because Jade, and I'll just start this off and Jade, you can pick it up because I don't want to take up too much of this conversation, but it's crazy because the start of it, we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if this was going to be mostly men going in there and going like, give me the sexy photos. Like, why aren't you more naked over here or whatever? And then it turned into something totally different. And that's what really, it didn't surprise me because I always knew like this was available because I did this with the men in my life, like my whole life. And we could get into a whole, my upbringing story that brought me to this work specifically, but I knew it was possible because I've had so many male friends that I have very mentally intimate conversation with in my life and have always held a romantic partnership that wasn't negatively affected by that. So I knew I was able as a woman or the woman I am to be able to hold both of those things. And when I got into OnlyFans, I had already been nurturing conversations on my free social media platforms, the Instagrams, Facebooks and whatnot, that were largely deepening, that they were getting into that space. And guys were asking like, hey, I have this question about, I have a porn addiction and I'm trying to figure out how to work through that because when I'm with my girlfriend, these are the issues that come up. I experience erectile dysfunction. I can't climax because of this and that. A lot of it was sex-based, but then it would transfer into even other things outside of that realm where it was like father wounds, mother wounds. It was kind of miraculous. And so starting OnlyFans, it was like, we're going to promote this, yes, as a sexy, a place to find sexy content as well. But as we've promoted since the very beginning with OnlyFans, it's a place where they can connect one-on-one with someone who actually wants to help them do this work. So, I kind of knew from the beginning it was going to go there, and it has definitely gone there. And I would say all of the people who are VIPs are diving deep. And then little by little, the rest kind of are trickling into getting into that work as well. What about you, Jade?
I know for me, starting my OnlyFans, obviously part of the goal was financial because I wanted to use the money to put my kids in a Montessori. That was like the number one thing about starting the OnlyFans. It's like, okay, this is how I'll do Montessori for my kids. But apart from the financial side of it, my goal was to just be a bridge, to bridge sexuality and spirituality. So it's very rare that I ever upload anything to OnlyFans that doesn't merge those two. It's very rare that I ever do whatever the striptease is or whatever without first saying something that encourages their spiritual journey or that isn't some sort of spiritual lesson. I also do like story time with Jade, where I'll read from King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or Way of the Superior Man, whatever it is. And I'll do it in lingerie and then I'll do my little act. So maybe some of them fast forward, but my goal is to be that bridge. And I know that for me, that is what I feel I am here for, is to go into. So I grew up in my teenage years, I was adopted into a really religious family. And then, 5 years later, I was modeling for Playboy and I was completely cast out from that church. So I feel that I've seen both sides of it. And in that church, flesh was bad, like sexuality was evil, but that's only because it was like separated from spirituality. I also feel that it suppresses the feminine, or it did for me, because our feminine is our body, our creativity, our sexuality, our intuition. And I feel that on my OnlyFans, I'm able to use all of those. And the only time that I think that why that church felt sexuality was evil is because they were separating it from spirituality. So what I feel my purpose here is to merge the two. And I feel that using my images and my videos, men are coming into contact with that, whether they know it or not. And that is giving the capacity to heal. I feel as far as the response, people have responded surprisingly really well, mostly to the story times. So there's that, but also a lot of the deep conversations have been with men who have been in long time relationships that have felt like maybe their partner doesn't desire them anymore, or her sex drive is gone. And I'm able to talk to them about polarity or David data type methods, things like that. So for me, the number one goal was to be a bridge. And I feel like I've been able to try to merge the two into like this higher mystical experience for them, whether they know it or not.
This is the Trojan horse that Dominic was referring to.
Mm-hmm.
You come from one thing and get something completely different.
Yeah. And it is, I know, Dom, we talked about how part of my work also, I feel, is to help get rid of sex trafficking. And I feel that this is also part of that work, because it's when sexuality is suppressed or judged, or what, culture would call perverted, that it comes out in dysfunctional ways. So if we can meet them and remove the shame and allow them to, also remove their mask and maybe leave them off, then, it can also heal that, collapse the duality and the judgment to where maybe that part of them is healed and it's not coming out in these dysfunctional ways that fuels things like sex trafficking.
Dom, when you were on our show, we kind of started, I think we were talking about how to masturbate like a king. Like that was one of the topics.
That's amazing. Yeah. How would you suggest masturbating like a king?
Well, you know better than anybody because you're one of the people who've taught us
slow down. That's the number one thing. Slow down. Like how would a king masturbate? Would he hide and do it quickly and, rush through
into
it?
a paper
Or
towel?
Would it be, because we only think of women when it comes to pleasure practice. So would it be turned into a pleasure practice? Maybe why can only I light candles and put on sexy music and dress up for myself and use toys? I think that a man allowing himself to make his masturbation routine an actual pleasure practice is how he masturbates like a king.
Making it sacred. Yeah. If anything the sovereign does,
which
right?
will
anything
change his sex life.
I mean, I feel like we should have talked about this the very first thing, like how to, because honestly, how to masturbate like a king, it sounds ridiculous. And I think the implications are tremendous, are profound. Because
Absolutely.
what you just said is like, would a king just escape to the bathroom and jerk one off into a Kleenex?
So many men are still masturbating like a teenager, and then they're having sex like a teenager.
Yes. To actually even contemplate what would it mean to masturbate like a king. I mean, the first place my mind went was like that throne from Game of Thrones with all the swords. And I'm just like, we're in this cave. And actually the two of you
Someone's
have these
feeding you grapes.
Yeah. There's something like I can summon somebody to clean up the mess. But it's like, I'm thinking about, okay, like how would I do that on my own? And actually, this is actually a reality that's facing me right now. Because I mentioned to you that I just ended a relationship. My next relationship is going to be with my queen. Like I'm talking about the relationship where I'm going to be building a family, building a future with. I want a story that I don't know the ending to. Like I'm fucking ready for that. And I'm doing the prep work for it and closing this one out and getting ready for that. In the meantime, I don't plan on having any sexual interaction with another partner until I find that one. That could change.
That's good prep work.
Yeah, because there's a cleansing. And so a part of that is, how can I learn to masturbate like a king where I know what it's like to have sex with a partner that's so intimate where I feel connected to a higher consciousness, right? Where like my heart is open. But a lot of my masturbation is still built on get it done. Maybe I'm stressed out. Maybe I'm feeling lonely. And like there's residue that's not my higher self that requires a new framework.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder too, like one of my favorite practices that I feel so fucked open by the divine is that Osho holy lovemaking. I think he calls it the divine fuck, where you imagine the divine masculine with the 4-foot cock of consciousness. And I just wonder if it's been talked about before, or if maybe you can try it and give us some feedback. If maybe you imagine the divine feminine, whoever that is for you, and you imagine, some sort of experience with her that's very, very sexual during your pleasure practice. And I know for women, the reason why that's so powerful is because we are longing, like we said, we're like, cannot be filled. But for a man, I just wonder what that experience would be.
I love that, because when I think back to like when I first started discovering masturbation as a child, like I had an imagination because I didn't have any sexual experiences. So I was imagining
White men can't jump.
You know the story. Yeah. Well, this was even, that was right. It was Rosie Perez who cracked it open for me first. And then after that, like when my parents returned the movie and I had to like, imagine.
She's your divine feminine.
My 4-foot cock of consciousness is craving Rosie. I think men can relate to the idea of now we need porn, or we need, for me, it's not like I'm not watching porn, but I'm thinking about prior lovers. And there's a part of my imagination that is completely atrophied. And it's about imagining that which I have not had yet. And so when you talk about, like the divine feminine or what I'm creating, because all of my experiences from the past are based on who I was back then, which is not who I am now, which is certainly not the man that I aspire to become. And so like this new realm of practice is going to require something much bigger. And I can already see the power in your program because it's stimulating this kind of thought in myself, who thinks about a lot of this stuff already. So.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add, because you said that you wanted to basically call in your queen. That is a large part of what our calls are going to be, is like how to call in your queen. And if you're already in a relationship, how to call forth a queen in your woman through awakening your own king. And then also, I know that with my last breakup, I was very, very firm that I was not going to continue to call in the same relationship over and over, and that I wanted to heal those patterns. So I took a 7 or 8 month celibacy. I did plant medicine every single month. But another thing I did was I made a list of exactly what I wanted my next relationship to embody, what I wanted my king to embody. And funny enough, around the 7th month and my 7th ayahuasca ceremony, I was like, it's time to masturbate. That's your, you've done enough. That was my homework from that ceremony, was to incorporate that into my pleasure practice and get to know my body more and to open myself up in that way.
You have the 4 turn-ons inside of the Awakening the King program that you have. And I would imagine that this is a distillation of all of the interactions you've had with the men who are in the MMA world, all of your Instagram followers, of which I think the two of you have 1 million in total.
About 11 million if you include Facebook. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even know Facebook. Yeah. So 11 million, and then you have OnlyFans, and then you have the podcast. So you have all of these interactions with men across a swath of different backgrounds, spiritual to otherwise. And so now you've been able to see the themes of how men show up in a variety of ways. So from that place, with all of that, you've distilled these 4 turn-ons.
I would say, to give just a little taste of the work that we're going to be doing on the workshop, and especially with the 4 turn-ons, Dom, you're going to love this because I know how much you love polling people. I do. Getting the stats. So we polled the women in our sphere, and a lot of them. This was also our social media following, the women in our social media following. This is the women in our personal lives, our friends, our mothers, our family, extended family, and asked, what is the most attractive factor or characteristic a man can display? And this is a big answer, and it's kind of what we break down in the 4 turn-ons in our course, but I'm not going to go into how we do that, but I'll go into the fact that what all women, all of them, there wasn't really any caveats here, want is integrity in a man. They want someone who is fully, I wouldn't even say fully integrated, but is at least on their journey toward integration. And to Jade and I can speak for us both here, because we've been in this work of how to integrate and how to pull out all those parts of you that you maybe severed because of during your young life, you were told those weren't safe to embody. And you've worn this mask, that's really not your real, the archetype you really are, right? And you've covered up, essentially, for men, the king that you truly are, this guy who can watch over the realm and decide when the warrior needs to take the throne and when the lover needs to take the throne, and so on.
Hey, Mercedes, quick question on this, because I think this word is such an important one, integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we can define integrity as like, I'm not a liar, I'm not a cheater, right? Like, therefore I have integrity. But how do you guys define integrity? Like, when you polled all these women, what was underneath integrity?
Yeah. So that's a beautiful question, because for me, integrity means wholeness. I think that's like the dictionary description of it is essentially whole. So we're all whole, right? We know that, everyone says that, but we don't usually feel whole to any degree. We feel like something's missing. Sometimes we're seeking, external things like drugs, addiction, another person, like, oh, if I find a right woman, I'm going to be whole. The reality is we are whole, but we've gone through traumas, conditioning, domestications that have led us to forget our wholeness. Essentially, we've forgotten parts of ourselves that are critical to our being or feeling whole. And a lot of our process will be about remembering those parts. And I say that word intentionally, remembering, because there's members of our body, members of our psyche that we have essentially stuffed down and suppressed because they were unsafe, like I was saying earlier. The process of bringing them back online and back into balance and alignment is the process of realizing or remembering your wholeness. And that is what integrity looks like to us. It does come with being rigorously authentic or rigorously honest with yourself. And in doing that, sometimes that takes, surrendering the outcome and just standing in your truth, and all these cliche things that we've heard said before, especially around the word integrity, that definitely comes with that. But
how can you tell when you meet a guy, whether that's through DMs or in person, whatever it may be, how can you tell that this is a king? This is a dude that's done the work, that has that integrity part of them.
I think you can pick up real quick. I know for me, I'm an intuitive, so I can literally see grounding cords on people. But I think that anyone who is doing the work can sense if someone is grounded or not right upon meeting them. So I think if they have a sense of groundedness, that's like really key. And then like Mercedes said, that they're, integrated, that they're undivided. But I think also for me, it's that they're living from this authentic, truthful state, that they do what they say they're going to do, and that they take responsibility for their words and actions, that they practice empathy. I think for me, though, because there's so many things that make up a king, but the things that turn me on in a king is the number one thing, aside from integrity, is that he lives his life in service to others. Like that he lives his life in service to the highest good of all. Like to me, there's nothing that melts my heart more. That, and then that transparent, authentic, truthful state. Also for me, I think like bravery and courage, because it takes so much bravery and courage to lead a woman in breath work prior to sex. Like that takes so much vulnerability.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. And to do a yoni massage too. Like there's so much, like, I don't know many men who are able to do that because it takes so much courage. And then another thing in the bedroom that I think takes a lot of courage that maybe in our industry we don't see as much, but that I notice outside, is like so many men are intimidated by like things like a woman using a sex toy during sex because they feel like it means they're not enough. So just boldness and courage, and being a leader in the bedroom in a way of like allowing her, leading her in breathwork, but also allowing space and safety for her to have pleasure. Like that takes so much boldness and courage. And I think that's so much what a king is. I think also most people listening probably haven't seen this, but like Dom, what you did with Maddie Moon when you guys did the practice, what was the practice called that you did with her?
Oh,
it was like a polarity practice, but
yeah,
to me, like a man being able to command a woman in a way that is like sexy and he's taking the lead, and it just turns that like fire on. So like all of those things take so much boldness and courage. Like if you're not confident in who you are and you're not, working on your integration, you won't be able to do those things because there's too much fear of failure.
Jay, I love those examples and what you just said, that fear of failure,
Yeah.
and especially when it comes to sex and intimacy, Because like, oh my God, what if I did this thing and she doesn't like it? What if I did this thing and she thinks I'm weird? What if this means that I don't get to get the thing that I want to get? Right. And so I agree with you in this realm at this intersection of inner work and sexuality, there is a lot of fear. I can speak for myself. Even I wonder sometimes, like, is this going to take too long? Is this actually going to be a turn off instead of a turn on? And every time seems important. There doesn't seem like a lot of time to quote practice. And so I love how you brought that to the table here.
But there's nothing that like makes a woman feel safer because you are fully taking the lead and providing the container for pleasure. You know, I know for me, especially coming from sexual trauma, like that for me removes all walls.
Let's talk about safety for a moment, because the two of you talk about this a lot on your show, and you talked about it in like the interviews of each other. And I think when men hear the word create a safe space for the women in their lives, maybe they naturally default towards, I'm going to ask her a million questions about what she wants. I'm going to be very gentle. And like, there's,
is it okay if I kiss you?
Is it okay if I, like I'm going to be overly consent based. And that's the one extreme, which can lead you to it can almost backfire, because then you're talking about, okay, but I also want that commanding presence too. And Mercedes, I think I'm going to direct this question to you, because you've spoken about how you're more masculine in nature and you need a man who's very confident in his masculine to out-masculine your masculine to allow you to drop into a feeling of safety. So what are some of the characteristics that your husband or, like a man in general would need to be able to demonstrate to allow you to drop that masculine so that you could slip into your feminine?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's such a struggle that so many women are dealing with too. I mean, it's, I wish it was just me, because we don't have one thing to solve, but it's so many women right now. And of course, a lot of it is my responsibility, right? So it is indicating what is mine and what is his to actually be responsible for. And I need to relax. I need to figure out where I need to do my own work and dissolve my own tendency to be in the hyper masculine. What I look for in my king, right, or in a king, in order to be able to do that relaxing well into my feminine, is presence mostly. But there's a few layers of this, because the presence, like you're talking about, like a commanding presence, it sounds so overt and so like intimidating. Like if I'm a guy, I'm probably like, that's a lot to ask of me. Like, I don't know if I can always be on, but it's that quality time presence, or it's that like, it doesn't have to be all day long with me that you're present, but like 30 minutes of quality time is so much better than hours of kind of distracted time where you're not really there. So setting aside that structure and being like, hey, here's what I can give. And I'm super happy to give this 30 minutes, let's call it, of quality presence. I can feel safe there. I can know what, first of all, he set an expectation, which is so kingly, to be able to set really good, thorough expectations. And then he shows up for it, right? And so he's showing up and he's being present and he's putting aside the phone and, dedicating some time to us and to me. So for me, that's a huge thing, is finding ways to be present, finding ways to be informed on how we communicate love to each other. For me, a big part of that is presence. And then you can get into like love languages. We can go down a whole rabbit hole of how else to do that. But there's also this piece that what I believe a king is someone who doesn't, it's not always perfect. It's not always going to be exactly like this. But the idea is someone who shows up for the full spectrum of emotions. He's not avoiding his feelings. He's not attempting to numb out, which is such a tendency for so many men. So finding a way, like I think Jade used the word empathy, and she's so good at giving really tangible examples. But for me, it's like that ability to go like, hey, I'm feeling this way. I got triggered by the thing you said, maybe, or something in my work day to day, like really sucked and it triggered me. And this is why. And and then he does the actual work of, I don't know, whatever it is for him, journaling or meditating or something to get him down to that root of what's actually happening. So it's not just like, I hated today, I'm just going to, pop this Xanax or go have a drink and not feel this stuff. I don't want to feel it. Look, sometimes I understand that's necessary, like give yourself a break to get to a time when you can do the work. But someone who shows up for the work, that makes us feel safe AF. For sure.
Yeah. And I want to add too, all of the things that we're listing that we feel a king is all things that we want to embody as queens, and we know that it's not, like she said, the perfect picture. These are all things that we're just at least aware of and working towards. I think also one thing we didn't touch on was like openness. Like a king for me lives from such an open place that he inspires me he opens me in ways that I wouldn't have been able to open on my own, especially to the divine or to source. And I also feel something about, and I'm not saying this is mandatory because for some people it just doesn't come natural, but there's something about a man who cries when he talks about things he's passionate about that makes me feel so safe and so blown open. And I do think that the men who I've seen embody that are those who journal, that sit in meditation, because they're slowing down in order to feel their feelings. So a man who slows down, that is huge for me. And then of course, living openly, like I said. And
if you've never seen Bryan cry talking about COVID testing, you haven't lived yet in your life.
It's so beautiful. Yes.
He's getting emotional right now. Jade, you talked about openness. And one of the things that came up on our interview on the Magic Hour podcast was, I think one of the posts I put out about, hey, the next time your woman orgasms, try this, right? Instead of racing to the next position or to disconnecting with her,
slowing down,
just slow down and actually hold her and see if you can guide her deeper into that feeling, into that, circulate that energy in her body. Because what came up in our conversation was like, you'd never experienced that before. And most women have never experienced that. I'm just going to hold the space for you to fully wash and bathe in this thing that's known as orgasm so that it can penetrate and permeate. And you can only take that so far on your own when you're in self-stimulation or, your own pleasure practice. But then to have like a masculine presence guide that so you can go deeper. Because the key phrase you said, and Madeline Moon talks about this, John Wineland talks about this, David Data talks about this, a masculine partner, if he's doing his work, can help the feminine go deeper than she can go on her own. And that comes back to, in the masculine world of things, if you think about even just like from physical parts of many men, not all men, but physical parts of the penis penetrates. And a big part of the masculine is to penetrate, to go deeper. The reason why, guys, like we love our greatest sports heroes is because they penetrated the nuances of every last orifice of that sport. Like Michael Jordan is there, or Dennis Rodman is staying until the middle of the night, figuring out the way the ball bounces off the rim so he could be the first one under the basket to grab that rebound. Like that's penetrating. And the feminine partners in our lives want that same kind of penetration, that interest to all of those nuances as well. So when you talk about openness, Jade, that's what I'm hearing that a king can do, is opening you to parts of yourself you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so much of that is that presence, right? And it is penetrative presence, essentially. And I think that one thing that maybe we didn't touch was direction and purpose, and a man that is steadfast in that direction that he's designed for himself, because women are going to test in every direction on anything that you plant your foot on as a man, because I do it. And we're going to also have, this chronic disapproval disease that we.
Why do you do that, Mercedes? Why is that?
Well, because of probably I could go into all the conditioning and upbringing that brought me to that, but it's all this passive,
it's a cultural
aggressive energy. Yeah.
And our culture is so much about punishing and not rewarding. It's like we think if we reward, you'll stop trying. And so we're trying to break that down in our own psyches.
Well, is it also, can I trust you? I'm testing because I want to know, can I trust you?
It's always a test. And
right?
The more you pass the test, but we don't consciously know that we're testing you until, we're doing
Put
this work.
And
then, right. Well, once we're conscious, a lot of times for me, I notice midway through the experience, oh crap, here I'm testing again. And then I try to at least make it a conscious experience and not an unconscious experience,
But a man who can stay in that, that direction, that purpose, and stay on track for whatever his goals are, even if they adjust, as they do often, is sexy as hell. It's the biggest turn on, even when I'm like, you're not giving me enough here, there, and the other. And maybe I'm testing, and maybe some of that's true. And we have to have that really open conversation to figure out how much he needs to show up for there. But if he can be like, look, even all the rallying you're doing against me, I've still got a place I'm going, and I want you to come along with me. And I'm going to facilitate that in the best way I can, in the healthiest way I can. but I'm not going to let you tear me off course. And I think a lot of women attempt to do that or attempt to control the direction that their man is going. And that can get really dangerous.
And this is big because I thought as a man, I was supposed to listen and to understand and then to adjust to the circumstances around me. And there's a lot of cases where that's probably a good idea. When it comes to this and sometimes our intimate partners, having that direction and being able to clearly articulate that direction as opposed to just changing course every time the wind blows, or even worse sometimes, staying in that direction and not being able to either articulate it or express it in a way that's understandable by our party or by our partner. That's something I'm learning, and it's a ton of fun too. I can feel my energy dissipate when I let the wind blow me over.
Yeah.
Right.
A ton of fun depends on the situation, my friend, because I went through a breakup recently of a partner, 6 or 7 months we were together, and I had to go through a lot of I went through a number of situations where there was a lot of testing going on. And it got me to think very deeply about where are the parts of me that are listening to the complaints that are valid? And then what are parts of this where I'm just becoming a punching bag? And sometimes it's very difficult to delineate where the line is. And I don't know if there's ever really like a specific place, but what it got me to thinking was the distinguishment between being defensive and then standing up for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And healthy boundaries. And
the and a big part of that, Jade, is having done the inner work to know what you stand for to begin with. Mm-hmm. And like when you talk about, like you said this before, I want a man who's brave and who's courageous, who's confident. That doesn't just like come out of nowhere when he gets tested. Like it's the work that we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I found for me in some of these situations where she was formidable, man. I mean, this woman, like when she puts the screws, like, you got to be on. And what I learned was when I was being defensive, I left my center. I got pulled away from my center, and I felt like a weakness. I felt like a whininess in my voice. And then when I pulled myself back to center, there's that groundedness that you talk of, Jade, right? I could feel my feet on the floor. I could feel my breath in my belly. And I could say, this is what you're saying that I hear. That's true. Here's the shit that's not okay. And there were plenty of times where I put that, that smack down, and she was like, that's kind of hot.
And that's what I was going to say. She may not feel like she'll like it, but it is such a turn on because it's a man who is firm in his boundaries. And that is so attractive. And you can trust it. Yeah.
You can trust that. Yeah. And
we need healthy boundaries from you guys, Otherwise, I think we will. It helps us to grow. It helps us to grow. And it helps us to stand strong in who we are when you guys set those boundaries for us.
And I know we're about to wrap up here, but there is this, or I don't know, maybe no, we're not, but there is this thing that I don't think men know about. I don't think women even know about, even though it is a female, very feminine characteristic where we literally will take and take and take infinitely. We have this yearning, this longing, that just is never ending. So that's where a lot of where the testing also comes from, and is energetic in a sense where we're going to, keep pulling on that thread and seeing how much we can get. And as a man, you have to have the reasonable boundaries, like get good and clear on what's reasonable, right? To give, but then know that there's a part she has to deal with, which is her own feminine yearning and longing. And she has to do the work of going, you know what? I need something else to fill that. It doesn't mean another man, but usually that means spirituality. Usually that means this sense of, you can call it God or source or whatever you want to call it, but something that is so big, so much larger than her that she can always take from it. And it can always fill her if she can become conscious of that.
Mercedes, that insatiability that you talk about, where that really was crystallized for me was the very first workshop I went to with John Wineland, where he puts men on one side of the room, women on the other. And he was talking to the women in the room. And he was like, hey, ladies, can you think about like the best sexual experience you've ever had, soul shattering orgasm, like just penetrated your core, open to God. And, all the women raised their hands. And he goes, great. Were you good after that? Like, was that it? Was that all you needed? And they all laughed, or they're like, no, we wanted more. And he was just like, it's bottomless in that respect. Right. And that was a wake up call to me, because it's like, if I ever had something that approached that kind of orgasm, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like, let me go to sleep. Let me order some Chipotle. Like, we're good. We're good.
That's your go-to post-sex food is Chipotle?
I can't stand Chipotle.
You know, I got to update that.
I'm not judging. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sex is that good. You mean Chipotle will do, right?
Fill that belly. Yeah. But Mercedes, I think this goes back to what you were saying around like where it's really sexy when a man sets proper expectations. So it's the, like, you're going to want more, you're going to want more, you're going to want more. And a man who recognizes that insatiability exists can be playful with that versus feeling like, oh my God, I can never do enough to please her. And can get playful and almost like tease her. It's like, yeah, you thought that was great? Cool. You know, maybe I'll surprise you with more of that tomorrow. Or maybe I won't. Like, we'll see when it happens next.
Yeah. And I think so many men are dealing with that idea of feeling like they're going to be consumed by their woman.
Or that their woman is too much, like she's too needy.
Yeah.
Because we are longing and we'll never be full. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun little dance we do, isn't it?
It's fun when we understand the mechanics. It's not fun when it's just happening and we don't know what's going on.
Then it feels like a game. Yeah. That you're losing.
It's the difference between, exactly. It's the difference between like being at sea and not having a compass and not having a rudder. Right? Very scary in a storm. Right?
Yeah.
But if you got a compass and a rudder, you can see the stars. You're like, oh, okay, I know approximately like what's going to happen. Yeah, where to go.
This has been great. So to recap the 4 turn-ons, who wants to take that?
Well, I know Mercedes just talked about the 4 of them in her example of what she needs in the masculine or what she sees in a king. But to list them off one by one, it's integrity, presence, polarity, which is what brings all the chemistry and the passion, and then direction, and devotion, which is what makes a woman trust you, makes her feel safe. And in our workshop, we're going to go, in our very first call, we're going to go very deep into each one of those and how to use them or how to embody them in a way that turns on the woman that you're with and the world around you. So we'll give, really practical examples and also ways to know if you're embodying it or not embodying it.
That's great.
We're offering 4 live calls that'll have so much juicy, in-depth information. That's just one.
That's all in the first call. Yeah.
Yeah. We're trying to keep some of it a little bit, close to the chest, and then we're going to be offering a ton of different bonuses to these guys that are, I think even worth more than the whole course itself, just in the bonuses because of how critical these practices have been in our own lives. And I'd be happy to give one of the most important of those to your listeners now, Dom, if you'd like.
Let's do it. That'd be amazing.
Okay. So, we talked about it a little bit during the show here, but for a man to get really skillful at slowing down, it will absolutely change his life. And especially in the middle of being triggered, which, some people can kind of feel their heart rate turn on and turn up whenever they're in conflict with someone, especially their romantic partner. So a lot of it is about being able to recognize that. And that's some of the tools we'll give during our workshop. But if you can get to some sort of awareness going like, ooh, I'm in anger, I'm in that flight or freeze mode, or, my heart rate is even up, my breathing might have increased, or I can feel the rigidity in the back of my neck stand up, a tenseness in my back. It comes in all different ways. Even maybe your jaw is a little locked and tense. Even right now, check in. Is it a little tense? Because mine always is.
I just loosened mine as you said it.
Yeah. And so one of the most beautiful things that we can all practice regularly as a preventative measure, but especially in the middle of any kind of conflict or any kind of that heart rate going up, is to take just an inventory. What's going on right now? Is my jaw tense? Okay, relax your tongue, relax your jaw. I mantra that to myself all the time. Relax your tongue, like all day long. If you relax your tongue, it relaxes everything down the whole middle of, all your chakras all the way down.
Especially to your genitals. Yeah.
Yeah. To your genitals. Exactly. And we think about anal retention. If someone's being anal, that's because they're literally holding tension. Yeah. They're clenching. And so relax your tongue is like that reminder to like, stop clenching. You're not in any situation where you need to be running, fight, flight, or freeze situation. You can relax right now. If you're in the middle of conflict, you feel like maybe you do need to fight right now or run right now or freeze in the moment and get confused. And in those situations, it's about really getting in tune with what's happening now instead of getting into that anxiety mode or thinking about the past or future or where you got to go or how you're going to get out of this, and taking inventory, being present with that moment. And a lot of that comes with the breath. So the thing I would just say is we could teach a box breathing step here. You could teach a lot of different ways to do the breathing. And we actually give those instructionals in our course and in the bonuses as well. But just taking a few deep belly breaths, which mean in through the nose, all the way down into the lower belly, like expanding out that lower belly, holding that for just a few seconds, and then slowly as possible, exhaling that out through the mouth is fine. If you can do it audibly, even better, out through the mouth. And just like 2 to 3 of those breaths will get you slowed down enough in the middle of conflict. So someone says something that's triggering, you go, "Ooh, I'm angry, I'm triggered." Take 3 deep breaths into the belly and maybe ask like, "Hey, I need to take 3 deep breaths." Like that's okay to say, and do it. And then see what happens. Like, are you able to notice where all that triggering is happening? Is it in your belly? Is it in your chest? Where is that fear gathering up for you? And if you can notice it, you're like more than halfway to being able to remedy it. And so that's really the trick. It's, that's what I'll give here, Dom, if that sounds good to you. It's just that relax your tongue, relax your jaw, take a few deep breaths and check in before responding. That's how we go from being reactive, and just using that fight or flight mode to react into that responsive place. That's really.
And I can add too, like if your heart rate is up, you're definitely in a triggered space. So that's like the very first place I check in with is my heart rate and my breath. But also when I get in the mind loop of he always or he never,
that's a good one.
That is proof right there that I am in a regressive state, because there's no possible way that he always or never. That is showing that I am tying him in with my father or mother wound that was always or never, because it's to, all of my past. So if I catch myself in that mind loop of those 2 words, then I know I'm in a regressive state and I know that I need to pause. So those are 2 also keys there, I think.
That's really helpful. And we just had our digital mastermind had a conversation around anger last week. Mm-hmm. And, so many of us guys have a stunted relationship with anger because we've never been taught how to deal with that super potent life force. It's interesting. Like we haven't been taught how to deal with any of these super potent life forces, whether it's sexuality or anger. When you talk about a king who can master his sexual energy, a king who can master his anger, like these are 2 of the biggest life forces in the world. And a man who can walk around embodying and feeling like he can control that chaos, allows others to feel safe. And so when you're talking about this breathwork practice, then let's say a man all throughout his life who's reacted to anger with, explosions, saying things, doing things that he regrets and feels shame for later, or the other end of the spectrum, eating the shit sandwich, biting the tongue, suppressing it, imploding internally, which is exhausting over the course of time. And then there's a lot of self-loathing as a result of that. What you are offering up as an alternative, which is like that breath slows it down. There's a separation. You can actually see the heart rate. You can hear those like she always, she nevers. And instead of reacting to them, that space between stimulus and response to create a new choice and to have a new choice to respond.
Yeah, we need that mindfulness gap, and we have to create it ourselves. That's our responsibility to get that little gap.
And it takes so much practice.
It does.
And also outside of our calls, the other bonuses will have like some worksheets and quizzes, but also recordings of us like helping you discover which, archetype that you're in right now, which attachment style you're in right now. We'll have some pleasure practices, some breathwork guidances, some journaling prompts, things like that, guided meditations, as well as an exercise to help you figure out why you're continually choosing the same person over and over, and how to recognize that and the root of that. So a lot of bonuses that on their own has the opportunity to change patterns.
Thank you so much. You've given me a lot to think about, a lot to look forward to in my own pleasure practice. So I guess the last thing would be the course I'm going to link in the show notes, along with your podcast, the Magic Hour, your Instagram accounts. The course itself, what's the investment? When does it begin? This episode is going to be releasing on Monday, April the 26th.
So it releases 1 week after that.
May 5th?
Or maybe it's a week and a half.
It's Monday, May 3rd. That's the day it'll release. If you're on our early bird wait list, then you get access to purchase the day before.
Yeah, you can go sign up on the early bird wait list right now because then you won't miss sign up. So the website's really simple. It's awakeningkings.com. But if you sign up on the early bird wait list, you will get an email with the registration link because our wait list right now is almost at capacity. So you do want to get on the wait list if possible. But either way, it will be open to the public next Monday for people to register. And like we said, it's 4 live calls, a bunch of bonuses. And we chose the price to 22 because it's the number of divine union. And it's, the women, guiding the men. And also just because we know that it's like, we could have charged a lot more, but we do want to make this really, really accessible to men because this is something that we really want to offer to the world. So as a gift.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. Well, thank you too for putting forth the boldest Trojan horse that I said I've seen to this day. And I've seen quite a few of them. I'm a connoisseur and a creator of Trojan horses myself, but this one takes the cake.
I don't know if you saw Mercedes' video where she's like dancing with the scepter and she's like, pew, pew, pew. But every time you say Trojan horse, I imagine her popping out of the Trojan horse, like with that going, pew, pew, pew.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And that visual is phenomenal now. Yeah, it's phenomenal. And time always flies by when I'm talking to two of you. So thanks for coming on the show and providing such unique perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Dom. Your show, like I said, has been such an inspiration. You have been such an inspiration, even seeing you on like Maddie's show. Mm-hmm. And the work you're doing is purely magic. So we are just stoked to be in this industry with you and other men like you, like Bryan as well. So thank you guys.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you too for I need to follow Bryan on Instagram. I'm sure he lives this out the same way, but I want to thank you for how much boldness and courage that we talked about that you have on social media, because you are extremely raw, transparent, and vulnerable, just like I am. People tell me all the time, like, wow, you really don't care what people think. And you have that same energy on your page. And literally every time I see one of your posts, I say out loud, like, yes, like it's so needed. So I am so thankful that I'm sure, because I know for me, I've lost a lot of work due to my social media. And I've gotten a lot of judgment. So I'm sure that you have too. And I just want to thank you for continuing on that because it is so needed.
So if you are not quite done listening to Jade and Mercedes, you're in luck. We've got 20 minutes of bonus content here that goes into a bit of the origin stories of both Jade and Mercedes, where you can get a sense of some of the trials and tribulations that they endured as children and some of the events of their lives that led them on this path of doing inner work, and why they're so passionate about reclaiming their own sexuality, destigmatizing, de-shaming sexuality, coupling it with spirituality, and also teaching men how to awaken the king within them. So we've got that 20 minutes of bonus podcast material here for you. We've also linked in the show notes the way to get in touch with their program. I've also linked some episodes of their Magic Hour podcast where they go deep into their origin stories. If like you're really foaming at the mouth to hear more about them, I would even encourage you to bypass these 20 minutes of bonus content and go straight to the links I put in the podcast, because those are a deep dive into both Jade and Mercedes' background. And I highly encourage you to listen to that. Otherwise, enjoy these next 20 minutes of bonus content. This leads to, I think, where we can get into two of your origin stories, because if someone were to discover you right now and look at your Instagram accounts, listen to your podcast, and then looking at the two of you, they may think you've had it easy your whole life and that you've always been sought after by men and had a lot of attention your way. But I know that in listening to your origin story podcast where you interviewed each other, which were great episodes, and I'm going to link those in the show notes so people can get a deeper dive on your histories, that two of you grew up almost having had the experience of being the ugly duckling, right? Like where you were outcast or outside what the cool circles were. And you had a lot of rejection that you had to face and some real significant trauma early on. And we can't do it all justice right now, but I think it's really important maybe to touch on part of that history as to why this inner work has become so important for each of you, and how it's showing up in what you're going to be bringing to the men in your Awaken the King work. So whoever wants to jump in on that one first.
Yeah, I think, and I'll speak for my story specifically, really the origin story you're talking about that I feel like if I can give you just the highlights of what brought me to this work, starting with having, I'm going to put this caveat out because it's important to just put this disclaimer of, I'm going to talk about my parents. I absolutely love my parents. We have good relationships, but of course we all experience some trauma from our upbringing, and our parents are always doing the best that they possibly can from their conditioning. I truly, truly believe that. And I know mine were, but growing up, I did not get the type of support and protection from my father that I needed. I was in a household with a very angry stepmother and didn't have the protection I needed there. My mother was kind of in and out during those years. And so what that kind of catalyzed for me was becoming the man that I needed. And it's interesting now because I see it in so many of my girlfriends that grew up with a father wound like that, where we become these really rigid, almost, these masculine women in the sense that we're the boss bitch, we're independent, that word is so abused. And we take on this personality that it does a lot and keeps us safe, of course, for that time, but it also causes a lot of damage. It causes a lot of, first of all, attracting a man who is obviously the opposite of that. So maybe has an overdeveloped feminine. Mm-hmm. And then we're very frustrated because we're never allowed to then relax into the feminine in relationship with those men. So it becomes this problem. So that definitely happened for me. I've attracted men into my life over my years that usually have a lot of that. It's usually a mother wound is what's happening there, but have that more feminine side or overtly masculine, where that's toxic in that realm.
Hyper-masculine. Yeah, like overly controlling that you've experienced, mm-hmm. right? Yep.
Yeah. And you guys have seen that flips sometimes for people, men and women, depending on if something triggers them or not, right? But so in calling in these men, it gave me also the experience to kind of play that role and see the side of like, how do I this is weird to say, but how do I almost father these men along? Because a lot of the men in my life didn't look at me as, I think they thought they were looking at me as this womanly person because I expressed myself so sexually in the forefront. I looked very feminine, of course, because I, the sexy bikini model, this type of thing. But I was very structured. I was very, motivated and just like bulldoze and push, push, push. And so men in my life seem to collect along with me because they are looking for almost a sense of structure and motivation in that way. Now I've been able to, balance a lot of that out in my life through the work, especially what Jade and I have been doing on the podcast and with the mentors and coaches that I've collected along my route. But I was able to build a business originally that was about validation, getting validation through my sexuality. And that was something that I didn't even consciously know I was doing, but I grew up with this religious background in the Catholic Church and a lot of shame coming from my grandparents on that side about sexuality. So of course it caused me to move into this like place where like, well, let me flirt with this. And my parents never shamed me about sexuality. So it was safe enough for me to play with it. So that became a way that I could see immediately, okay, I can get validation here. All the bullying from my younger years aside, I was like, let me recover this by getting validation solely through this physical way. And then actually Corona hit. So like we started the podcast, I started figuring out some of these things and doing some of my own shadow work and trauma work and realizing where I held so much shame in so many parts of my life. Then coronavirus hit. And in that section of like 5 to 7 months or so, I don't know what happened, but I basically was like, I'm taking advice from this, pandemic and going inward all the way. So I basically hired a therapist to see every single week for that whole, I'm still seeing her. And then I dream journaled because I had done enough work with depth psychologists and Jungian psychologists to know like about dreams. I knew I had the most vivid dreams my whole life. They always were instructing me to do things, but I didn't always know exactly what. So I dream journaled for 7 months straight. So much of that was about dissolving my shame around my own sexuality and the ways that I was projecting that onto men. At the end of that sector, I found like OnlyFans kind of dropped in my lap. One of my girlfriends like, hey, you should join this. It's doing this and that for me. And I was like, how can I bridge these two things? Like, I just have realized that I no longer need to be ashamed of like expressing myself in this realm. So how can I finally take that and make money? Because that, I don't know, this probably doesn't come up much in your show. I don't think people talk about this ever, but tying money to consumerizing sexuality, to sexuality. So consumerizing sexuality is what makes it taboo for so many people. So when you are the stripper or the porn star, whatever the sex worker is, that suddenly, because there's money tied to it, it's like, oh no, that's too much.
It goes into that category of sex work now.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a big spectrum of what sex work involves, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so that I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this now with no shame involved. And that just, for me, I got a, business mentor, try to figure out how I could tie all these men who I'd had in my life, who I love and I've supported, and they've supported me back. And we've had these like beautiful relationships. How can I support them with this newfound shamelessness, essentially? And it's what turned into a very brazen, maybe like, pioneering venture into being the bridge between sexuality and deeper work. So spirituality, like Jade was mentioning. That's kind of my journey here.
Maybe a follow-up question for you, Mercedes, and then Jade, I want to hear yours as well, would be, you've talked to Mercedes about, I had to become the masculine presence in my life that my father wasn't, right? And I took on like a lot of this masculine energy and the getting things done and the work around awakening the king. Would it be fair to say that a part of your motivation for waking up more kings and men would be on some level for you to be able to relax more into your feminine? If there were more kings on this planet, more men who could like allow you to feel safe, seen, expressed, so that like you could just take your hands off of that, off the reins, that you could relax.
Absolutely. And I'd say that that's like the core motivator for the work, because I have 5 sisters, no brothers. So, and I've collected so many other sisters along my journey just because I've worked in modeling for so long, and especially in promotional modeling, there's just girls everywhere. And I was always kind of like the mother hen or the old, the bigger sister. And because of that, I've seen this strife in women for so long and in myself. I realize like there is a need here. Like there is a big there's a gap. And I think it's time that we're all looking at it, and men really want it too. Like they understand that there is a lack here. There is a lot of men that also don't have fathers. Like my dad, his dad died when he was 12. So he didn't have that guy to show him exactly how to be the dad or whatever, This is happening in a lot of different ways for men, right? Like we know that that's happening. And it's not just that. There's a million different ways that men come to develop an overactive feminine or get into that toxic masculinity area. I don't love using that term, but anyway, yes, I would say absolutely. I'm doing it for myself as much as like womankind for all the generations. And I'd say because I really love men, like I think I've had some shitty experiences, let's be real, with, immature men, but I was also immature. Like we were in the same energy. And I've had some really beautiful experiences with men who I think really were showing up in their king. And so I know it's possible. You guys have been a beautiful example of this here. And I've listened to your show for a while now. So I mean, we can see it's possible. We can see men are showing up. Not to paint men who are doing this work as like the perfect picture or the bravest, martyr who's going to fall on his sword and all these things, because the reality is that a brave man who's willing to do this work, or a brave woman who's willing to do this work for that matter, is someone who's willing to be vulnerable enough to go like, I have some shitty sides. Like I have some stuff and shadows I need to dig up and look at. And I'm just ready to dance in this area. I'm ready. I'm doing it.
Yeah, you are. Thank you. And
yeah.
Jade, what do you have to say about your story, your origin story?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I feel that my work is to remove the shame and collapse that judgment. But through doing this work has also been what has healed my shame. So when I was a kid, there was so much shame in my childhood, but there was also a lot of sexuality for such a young child. So both of my parents come from a long line of sexual trauma as well. But my birth dad, he would, when I was only, 2-3 years old, he would beat my mom so bad that she would go unconscious and revert back to her being a child, and she would crawl on the floor. And so my nervous system was so attached to hers at that time that it literally felt like it was being done to me. And then to watch them have sex shortly after also felt it was there for a while there. I wasn't sure if I had sexual trauma with my father because that's how close my nervous system was to my mother. Plus, I was sitting there seeing it. So that gave me a lot of self-worth and shame issues just because I felt like I wasn't worthy. I didn't belong, seeing that type of abuse happening. And then also him constantly choosing drugs over us and having to go to prison and things like that. But also, I don't know if it was seeing that, like the sexual acts in front of me at such a young age, or if there is some sexual trauma that hasn't been uncovered. But I started having orgasms at 3-4 years old as well. I would mimic what I saw with my dolls or with my friends that were that age and would have full on orgasms. So it sounds weird, but as early as I can remember, I felt very sexual. As a teenager, I wasn't a promiscuous teen. I was actually pretty prude because I experienced some sexual trauma with multiple family members. And, you either get very prude after or you get very promiscuous. I leaned towards the prude. But when the first person who found out about my sexual trauma, instead of being there for me or comforting me, the thing they said instead was, I bet you liked it. I bet you enjoyed it. I bet you liked his fingers inside you. And so there was this feeling of disgust. Even though I didn't like the act that happened, there was this feeling of disgust with liking anything sexual. And I know The Body Keeps the Score talks about the deciding factor in someone with sexual trauma that either causes them to have PTSD or causes them to not have PTSD is whether or not that first person that finds out comforts them or shames them. And mine was so much shame. So my shame continued on, as well as all of the verbal abuse in my family. Then, I live on the streets for a couple of years. I have so much shame on myself because there's no love in my life. I've dropped out of high school. I'm a waitress and a newspaper girl. I was just so ashamed of who I was. And then to get adopted into a religious family that is very fear and shame based to get you to follow the rules, basically. There was just from as early as I can remember, long line of shame. That was the core theme. So then in my 20s was when I started to step onto the growth path. I got an amazing mentor, Tom Shadyac, who was the first person ever that I felt saw my worth and spoke it, acknowledged it with no agenda. And that's when I started to really step into my worth. And that's also around the time I started shooting with Playboy, staying in the mansion and things like that. And for some reason, for me, shooting that nude work helped remove the shame around my body, to where I am now, wanting to help remove that shame for others is kind of where we are. But the theme there that I see is shame, and also I think disassociation with my body in order to survive. And now I feel that this work brings me actually more into my body.
It sounds like your journeys have been for self first to begin with. Almost cathartic, whether it was Jade talking about the Playboy modeling or Mercedes like in the bikini model. It sounds like that was something that part of the path that you had to go to now get to this point that Dominic was saying with like our platform and social media and everything else. Thanks for sharing that story. Guys might be listening to this story, and I had a conversation a weekend ago with a couple of friends about how do you pick a coach or even a therapist for that matter. And there was a lot of qualifications. Are they old enough? Do they have the right credentials? Have they been successful financially? There's a lot of things, right? And we compared, is it a checklist or is it a feeling in terms of how do you pick someone? It might be easy for a guy to hear your story and see where your platform's at and say, what can I gain that's valuable from someone that's showing off their body, that's on OnlyFans, that's at this intersection that we keep talking about? What do you say if a guy brings that to you, or have men brought that to you? What do you say to that?
Well, I feel that anyone that knows Mercedes and I personally knows that we have done the work on ourselves. And we've also, if you've listened to our podcast, we fully show up with our guests and absorb their knowledge as well. And I also feel that the woman is intuition. She is an awakened woman can be a conscious man's compass, can be the voice of God if you're open to it, because she is intuition. And so I feel that we bring all of that to the men in front of us. And I firmly believe that men need to be initiated by an older man. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that men need other men, that they need mentors. But I feel that Mercedes and I bring something different. And it's something that the perspective from a woman too is so helpful and something that he may not be able to get from a man on how to relate to a woman, on how to turn her on. Like a male mentor is, I think it needs to go hand in hand, but there are things that he would not be able to offer when it comes to things like that. So I think that we just offer a different spice.
Yeah. And I just add to that and say that a man coming in, and this does happen, like, hey, why would I join this course? You guys are women. How do you know anything about men? That's, you're also young women, and we're not that young. We just do a good job at looking like it.
But I'm 54.
Yeah.
Doing a hell of a job if that's the case, Jade.
So I would say to him, like, well, you're here, aren't you? You entered this space and decided to connect with me, even if the first connection was trolly, a little bit trolly.
And even behind that is some curiosity. So can you answer the call of curiosity and see what's behind that?
Yeah, exactly. And him asking is him being curious. And to me, that's an opening, and that's literally opening. Like if he's going to take the time to write a message or to contact us in some way, or that opening is enough for me to go like, hey, you came and showed up to this work. This is something that you may not have ever done somewhere else. And I mean, to be honest, we don't do a lot of like protecting ourselves against trolls because that's not who we're talking to. Let's be real.
Welcome the trolls.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll also say too, that like a common theme I see with my friends who are awakened women is that they will say something so powerful to their men. And 3 weeks later, he'll be like, oh, guess what? So-and-so told me today. And it's verbatim what she said 3 weeks ago. But he missed out on that golden nugget. And that is how powerful, like if men can use their women as that tool for awakening and as that compass. And so I feel like we can at least open that up in men to where they don't miss out on that from their partners.
You know what time it is. What is the one insight, the one aha, the one takeaway that you're going to put into practice, that you're going to take action on from this conversation with Jade Bryce and Mercedes Terrell? I know that for me personally, I'm going to be redesigning my masturbation practice so that I can learn how to masturbate like a king. I found that to be quite a useful exercise during our conversation today. What is the one thing that you are going to take away from this episode to upgrade your life to live like a king?